Nobody sat near Damien Moretti unless they were invited. That was the first thing I noticed when I stepped into the diner at 11:47 p.m. Rain hammered against the neon-streaked windows hard enough to shake the glass, turning the streets of Manhattan into rivers of distorted headlights and silver reflections. My sneakers squeaked against the black and white tile floor as I pulled Ethan closer to my side, his small hand freezing cold inside mine. The hostess looked exhausted. So did everyone else. Friday nights in the city had a way of draining people until they became ghosts moving under fluorescent lights. "Sorry," she muttered, barely looking up from the register. "Only thing left is counter seating." I followed her gaze and immediately understood why nobody else had taken the empty stool. The man sitting there looked like trouble wrapped in a $5,000 suit. Black jacket. White shirt open at the collar. Dark hair pushed neatly back like he'd stepped out of some expensive magazine ad for watches normal people couldn't afford. But it wasn't the suit that made the entire diner avoid looking at him. It was the silence around him. Like the air itself knew not to get too close. Even Ethan stopped fidgeting when he saw him. The stranger sat alone in the corner booth beneath the flickering Budweiser sign, one hand wrapped around a black coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. A plate of untouched steak rested in front of him. Nobody joined him. Nobody interrupted him. And near the entrance, two men in dark coats watched the room without pretending not to. Security. Not cops. Something colder. I should have walked out right then. Maybe if I had, my life would have stayed simple. Hard. But simple. Instead, Ethan tugged my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered softly, his voice sleepy against the storm. "I'm tired." My chest tightened. He hadn't complained once during the 2 subway transfers or the 6-block walk through freezing rain after my car refused to start outside the hospital parking garage. 6 years old and already too used to struggle. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked back at the hostess. "There's really nowhere else?" She hesitated before nodding toward the empty seat across from the stranger. "Only if he says yes." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. Like permission mattered. Like everyone here lived by rules I didn't understand. Ethan leaned against me, exhausted enough that I could feel him shaking from the cold through his tiny jacket. I exhaled slowly and walked toward the booth before courage could leave me. The closer I got, the more unreal the man seemed. Expensive watch. Sharp jawline. Eyes darker than midnight whiskey when they finally lifted toward me. He didn't smile. Men like him probably forgot how years ago. I stopped beside the table, rainwater dripping from the edge of my coat onto the floor. "Can I sit here?" For a moment, he just stared at me. Not at my face first. At Ethan. At the soaked sleeves of my thrift store coat. At the purple shadows under my eyes that no concealer could hide anymore. Then his gaze returned to mine. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous. The diner had gone so quiet I could hear the old refrigerator humming behind the counter. Finally, he spoke. Low voice. Smooth. The kind that made people listen even when they didn't want to. "Sit." I nodded quickly, already pulling Ethan into the booth beside me. But before I could thank him, the stranger lifted his coffee slowly and added, "But if you do, your life changes after tonight." My heartbeat stumbled hard enough to hurt. Something cold slid down my spine after he said those words. Not loud. Not threatening. Somehow that made them worse. Ethan climbed into the booth beside me and immediately curled against the cracked leather seat, exhausted enough to fall asleep sitting upright. I brushed damp blonde hair away from his forehead while trying not to look directly at the man across from us. The diner suddenly felt too warm. Too quiet. Outside, rain slammed against the windows hard enough to blur the city into streaks of red and white light. "You should order something hot," the stranger said calmly, cutting into his steak like we had known each other for years. "Your son is freezing." His voice carried the kind of control people only had when they were used to being obeyed. I swallowed carefully. "We are fine." One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. "No," he said. "You are pretending to be." Before I could answer, the waitress appeared beside our table almost instantly, like she had been waiting nearby the entire time. She looked nervous. Not because of me. Because of him. "Bring them soup," he told her without checking the menu. "And hot chocolate." "Right away, Mr. Moretti." The name hit me strangely. Moretti. Italian maybe. Powerful definitely. I noticed the waitress straighten her posture the second she spoke to him. Like fear and respect had become the same thing around this man. "You did not have to do that," I said quietly after she rushed away. "I know." He folded the napkin beside his plate with precise movements. Expensive watch. Steady hands. Zero wasted energy. Everything about him looked controlled down to the way he breathed. Then his eyes lifted toward me again. "But you walked in here looking over your shoulder every 3 seconds. My stomach tightened instantly. I had not realized anyone noticed. "I am not." "You are." He leaned back slightly, gaze calm and unreadable. "And whatever you are afraid of followed you into this diner." My pulse stumbled hard enough to make my chest ache. Instinctively, I glanced toward the fogged front windows. Big mistake. Because now I noticed it too. The dark SUV parked across the street. Engine still running despite the storm. My fingers tightened around Ethan automatically. The stranger saw it. Of course he did. Men like him probably noticed everything. "Who is in the SUV?" he asked. "Nobody." Bad answer. The waitress returned with tomato soup and hot chocolate, setting the bowls down carefully like she was handling explosives. Ethan stirred beside me when the smell hit the air. The poor kid looked half asleep already. I pushed the cup gently toward him. Slowly, I whispered. "It is hot." He nodded tiredly. The stranger watched the interaction without speaking. Something shifted slightly in his expression then. Not softer exactly. Just quieter. "How old is he?" 6. "And his father?" The question landed harder than it should have. I stared down into the soup. Steam curled upward between us. Not around. Anymore. Technically true. The stranger studied me for another long second before nodding once like he had already guessed that answer. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan low and heavy. One of the men near the entrance touched his earpiece suddenly. Another looked toward the windows. The energy inside the diner changed instantly. Tighter. Sharper. I felt it before I understood it. The stranger did not even turn around. "Claire," he said calmly. My blood froze. I had never told him my name. "How do you know that?" He ignored the question completely. "Take one more sip of your soup," he said quietly. "Because in about 30 seconds, the men outside are going to walk through that door pretending they are here for coffee." My throat went dry so fast it hurt to swallow. The stranger across from me lifted his coffee cup calmly while my entire body locked in place. 30 seconds. That was what he said. 30 seconds before the men outside came through the door. I should have grabbed Ethan and run. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to move. But something about the way Damian Moretti sat there completely unbothered terrified me more than the storm outside. Like he already knew exactly how this night would end. Ethan blinked sleepily beside me, tiny hands wrapped around the hot chocolate cup. "Mom," he whispered. "What is wrong?" I forced myself to smile even though my pulse was pounding hard enough to blur my hearing. "Nothing, baby." Another lie. I had become very good at lying over the past year. Pretending everything was normal. Pretending I was not scared every time my phone buzzed. Pretending bruises happened because I was clumsy. Pretending Ethan did not hear shouting through apartment walls at 2 in the morning. Pretending we were safe. The bell above the diner door chimed softly. My entire body froze. 2 men stepped inside shaking rainwater from dark jackets. Big shoulders. Heavy boots. Faces I recognized instantly. My ex-boyfriend's friends. Men who always followed him around like shadows with cheap cologne and ugly tempers. The taller one scanned the diner quickly before his eyes landed directly on me. There she is. My stomach dropped. So hard it made me dizzy. Ethan immediately moved closer against my side. The men started walking toward our booth. Damien did not even turn around. Not immediately. He simply cut another piece of steak with slow precise movements while the entire diner seemed to stop breathing. One of the men reached our table first. Claire, he said with fake patience. Ryan has been looking everywhere for you. I said nothing. My fingers tightened around Ethan protectively. You need to come home. Damien finally looked up then. Calm dark eyes. Completely unreadable. She does not want to go, he said quietly. The man barely glanced at him. Mind your business. Something dangerous flickered behind Damien's expression for half a second before disappearing again. Not anger exactly. Worse. Disappointment. Like the man had made a very stupid mistake. You walked into my business the moment you scared the child. The second man stepped closer to the booth. Listen, old man, this does not concern you. Old man. He could not have been older than 34. But Damien only leaned back slightly against the leather seat, studying them both with cold patience. Near the entrance, one of his security men straightened subtly. Another touched his sleeve near the wrist where an earpiece probably hid beneath the fabric. Nobody moved yet. They did not need to. The taller man focused on me again. Ryan is worried about you, Claire. I almost laughed at that. Worried. Last week Ryan punched a hole through our kitchen wall because Ethan spilled orange juice on the floor. 2 days ago he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks because I answered a text message too slowly. Worried was not the word. Possessive maybe. Angry definitely. Dangerous absolutely. I am not going back, I whispered. His jaw tightened instantly. You do not get to decide that. Before I could answer, Ethan suddenly slid out of the booth. My heart nearly stopped. He walked directly toward Damien instead. Tiny sneakers against black and white tile. The entire diner watched in silence as my son climbed carefully onto the seat beside the most feared man in the room like it was the safest place in Manhattan. Damien looked down at him once. Chocolate good? He asked quietly. Ethan nodded. Then my son did something he had not done around another adult in months. He leaned gently against Damien's arm. The 2 men standing beside our table went completely silent. And for the very first time that night, Damien Moretti smiled. The smile changed everything. Not because it was warm. It was not. Damien Moretti smiled like a man who almost never did it, like the expression itself belonged to another lifetime. But Ethan relaxed beside him instantly, small shoulders finally lowering for the first time all night, and somehow that unsettled me more than the men standing over our table. Children noticed things adults ignored. They sensed danger differently. And my son, who barely trusted anyone anymore, had just curled beside a stranger with the kind of comfort that made my chest ache. The taller man shifted impatiently. Cute moment, he muttered. Now let us go. Damien rested one arm along the back of the booth behind Ethan, gaze still calm. You are interrupting dinner. You deaf or something? The other man snapped. This woman is leaving. Damien finally looked directly at him. No raised voice. No dramatic reaction. Just those cold dark eyes settling on the man slowly enough to make the entire diner feel smaller. "No," he said quietly. "She is not." Silence swallowed the room. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city while rainwater streamed down the windows in silver lines. I realized every employee behind the counter had suddenly stopped pretending to work. Even the cook near the grill stood completely still. Everybody was watching Damien now. Waiting for his reaction like people waited for storms to break. The taller man laughed nervously under his breath. "You do not know who her boyfriend is." "I know exactly what he is," Damien replied. My stomach twisted hard. He said it so casually. Like he had already figured out pieces of my life I had spent months trying desperately to hide. One of the men took a step closer to the booth. Wrong decision. Near the entrance, Damien's security moved immediately. Not aggressive. Just present. Two men in black coats suddenly appeared beside our table without a sound, their posture calm but unmistakably firm. The atmosphere changed so fast it stole the oxygen from the room. The guy beside me noticed it too. His confidence cracked almost instantly. "This is insane," he muttered. Damien ignored him completely and looked at me instead. "Claire." Hearing my name and his voice still felt dangerous somehow. Controlled. Precise. Like he had already decided I mattered before I even sat down. "Does your son always flinch when someone raises their voice?" The question hit harder than shouting ever could. My throat tightened immediately. Beside him, Ethan lowered his eyes into the hot chocolate cup. I felt shame crawl up my spine like ice water because the answer was yes. Loud noises. Slammed doors. Heavy footsteps in hallways. My 6-year-old reacted to all of it now. Damien noticed my silence and nodded once like silence itself was confirmation enough. Then he reached into his jacket slowly. The two men near our booth stiffened immediately. He pulled out a simple black business card and placed it on the table in front of me. No logo. No address. Just a phone number embossed in silver. "Take your son somewhere safe tonight," he said calmly. "Ryan will not stop after this." Hearing Ryan's name spoken aloud inside that diner made my pulse stumble again. "How do you know his name?" I whispered. Damien leaned back slightly. "Because people like him create patterns." His eyes flicked briefly toward the fading bruises near my wrist before returning to mine. "And I pay attention to patterns." My chest tightened painfully. Nobody had looked at me that carefully in a very long time. Not friends. Not coworkers. Certainly not Ryan. The taller man suddenly scoffed. "You think you scare us because you own some fancy suits and security guards?" One of Damien's men actually smiled at that. Small. Almost pitying. Damien himself remained perfectly calm. "No," he said softly. "I scare you because deep down, you already know who I am." The room went dead silent again. And judging by the sudden loss of color in both men's faces, he was right. The confidence disappeared from their faces first. That was the strange part. Not fear. Exactly. Recognition. Like they had walked into the diner expecting an argument and suddenly realized they were standing too close to something much bigger than themselves. The taller one swallowed hard before forcing out a laugh that sounded weak even to him. "Come on," he muttered to his friend. "Let us go." Neither of them looked at me again. They backed away from the booth carefully, avoiding eye contact with Damien's security as they moved toward the door. The bell chimed softly once more when they disappeared back into the storm. Only after the SUV outside finally pulled away from the curb did I realize I had stopped breathing completely. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them beneath the table to hide it. Ethan stayed tucked beside Damien without an ounce of fear. Actually worse than that. He looked comfortable. Safe. My son had spent the last 8 months sleeping with the bedroom light on because loud voices made him panic awake in the middle of the night. But here, beside a man everyone else in Manhattan seemed terrified of, Ethan looked calmer than I had seen him in months. I did not understand it. Maybe I never would. Damien reached for his coffee again. Eat your soup before it gets cold. The normalcy of the comment almost broke me. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes so fast I had to look down at the table. Nobody had taken care of me in a very long time. Not gently anyway. Thank you, I whispered quietly. He studied me over the rim of the cup. You are thanking the wrong thing. What does that mean? It means tonight was luck. His voice remained calm, but something darker settled underneath the words now. Men like Ryan do not enjoy being embarrassed. My stomach tightened immediately. He was right. Ryan hated losing control more than anything. The memory of his face after arguments still lived in my chest like old bruises. Silent anger. Forced smiles. Doors shutting too hard. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself. Damien noticed instantly. Of course he did. How long? He asked. I stared at him blankly. What? How long have you been surviving him? Not dating him. Not loving him. Surviving him. The word landed so precisely. It hurt. I looked down at Ethan again before answering. About a year. Damien nodded once slowly. And the child? Ryan is not his father. Something unreadable flickered behind Damien's eyes at that. Relief maybe. Or calculation. I could not tell. The diner lights buzzed softly overhead while outside the rain finally began slowing into a cold mist against the windows. Midnight had settled fully over Manhattan now. The streets looked emptier. Lonelier. Where were you planning to sleep tonight? He asked. I hesitated too long. Another thing he noticed immediately. You do not have anywhere. It was not a question. Heat crawled up my neck with embarrassment. The apartment lease is under Ryan's name, I admitted quietly. I left while he was at work. Saying it aloud made me feel smaller somehow. Like failure had become something physical sitting on my shoulders. Damien glanced toward Ethan sleeping against his arm. How much cash do you have? I almost laughed at the question. $43. That will not even get you a hotel room in this part of the city. I know. Silence settled briefly between us. Not awkward. Heavy. Like the night itself was waiting. Then Damien reached into his coat again and placed a silver keycard beside the black business card already resting on the table. There is a penthouse suite at the Vale Hotel downtown, he said calmly. Top floor. Private entrance. My staff already knows you are coming. My heartbeat stumbled instantly. I cannot accept that. You can. Why would you even help me? For the first time all night, Damien looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper than that. Older somehow. His gaze shifted briefly toward the rain-soaked window before returning to Ethan sleeping beside him. Because your son climbed into a booth beside a man the rest of this city fears, he said softly. And he did it like he still believes people can be good. The silver keycard sat between us like a choice I was not ready to make. I stared at it while the diner lights reflected softly against its polished surface. Top floor. Private entrance. My staff already knows you are coming. Nothing about Damien Moretti sounded uncertain. He spoke like a man used to the world rearranging itself around his decisions. That should have scared me more than it did. Maybe I was too exhausted to think clearly anymore. Ethan shifted sleepily beside him, tiny head resting against Damien's shoulder now like they had known each other longer than 20 minutes. I should have pulled him away. Instead I sat frozen, watching the strangest thing I had seen in years. Damien looked, careful with him. Not awkward. Not performative. Careful. Like he understood children could break in ways adults never fully healed from. Claire. His voice pulled me back immediately. You are falling asleep sitting upright. I blinked hard. My entire body ached suddenly now that the adrenaline was fading. Double shifts at the hospital cafeteria. Sleepless nights. Constant anxiety. Fear wore people down quietly over time until they stopped recognizing themselves in mirrors. I used to laugh easily once. I barely remembered what that sounded like anymore. I cannot go to a hotel owned by someone like you, I admitted softly. Damien's expression barely changed. Someone like me. You know what I mean. No, he said calmly. I do not think you do. Silence settled between us again while rain tapped gently against the windows. Softer now. The storm finally losing strength outside while mine kept growing louder inside my chest. Damien rested one hand lightly against Ethan's back when my son shifted in his sleep. Small movement. Instinctive. Protective. You think I am dangerous, he said quietly. I think everyone in this diner is afraid of you. That is not the same thing. I did not know how to answer that. Because deep down, he was right. Fear and danger were not always identical. Ryan scared me constantly, but nobody ever lowered their voices when he entered rooms. Nobody stood straighter around him. Nobody looked relieved when he walked away. Around Damien, the fear felt different. Controlled. Like people respected the line he drew and prayed never to cross it. One of his security men approached the booth slowly then. Tall. Gray coat. Earpiece barely visible beneath dark hair. Sir, he said quietly. The car is ready. Damien nodded once. The man disappeared immediately afterward without another word. I stared after him. How many people work for you? Damien reached for the check before answering. Enough. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting tonight. Somehow that almost made me smile. Almost. He stood then, and the entire atmosphere inside the diner shifted instantly again. Conversations lowered. Eyes dropped. Even the waitress behind the counter straightened subtly. Damien Moretti did not need to announce power. It followed him naturally like expensive cologne and winter shadows. Ethan stirred awake when Damien gently touched his shoulder. Time to go, buddy. My son blinked sleepily up at him. Are you coming too? The question caught both of us off guard. Damien paused for half a second before answering. No, Ethan frowned immediately. Why not? Something softened behind Damien's eyes so briefly I almost missed it. Because your mother is still deciding whether she trusts me. Ethan looked at me then. Really looked at me. I trust him. My chest tightened painfully. Children were not supposed to carry instincts like that. They were supposed to worry about cartoons and homework and cereal brands. Not whether adults felt safe. Damien extended the silver keycard toward me one last time. 1 week, he said quietly. Stay at the hotel until I handle Ryan. I swallowed hard. And after that? He held my gaze steadily. After that, he said softly, you decide whether you still want to run. The hotel lobby looked nothing like places people like me were supposed to enter. Marble floors. Gold lighting. Quiet piano music floating through the air like something out of an old movie. The kind of place where nobody rushed and nobody looked tired. I stood just inside the revolving doors with Ethan half asleep against my shoulder, rainwater still dripping from the edge of my coat onto polished stone worth more than my yearly salary. Every survival instinct told me to turn around before someone realized we did not belong there. Then the woman behind the front desk looked up and smiled immediately. Ms. Bennett, she said warmly. We have been expecting you. My stomach tightened again. Damien had arranged everything before I even agreed to come. A man in a dark gray suit appeared beside us almost instantly. Not security exactly. More polished than that. "Allow me to carry your bags, ma'am." I glanced down at the single duffel bag hanging from my shoulder. Everything Ethan and I owned fit inside it. Somehow that felt humiliating standing beneath crystal chandeliers and walls lined with imported flowers. "I can manage," I murmured quietly. The man smiled politely anyway. "Mr. Moretti requested that we take care of you." Requested. Not ordered. But something told me nobody ignored requests from Damien Moretti. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt unreal. Ethan had fallen fully asleep against me now, tiny fingers curled into the fabric of my sweater while soft jazz music played overhead. I watched the floor numbers climb higher and higher until Manhattan itself disappeared beneath us. 32nd floor. Private access only. The elevator doors opened directly into silence. Warm lighting glowed across dark hardwood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Rain still shimmered against the glass outside while New York stretched endlessly below us in silver and gold lights. I stopped breathing for a second. The suite was bigger than my old apartment building. "Mom," Ethan whispered sleepily against my shoulder. "Are we rich now?" A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Small. Broken. But real. The first real laugh I had heard from myself in months. The man in the suit noticed. "The kitchen has already been stocked," he explained quietly. "Fresh clothes for both of you are in the bedrooms. If you require anything else, there is staff available 24 hours a day." Fresh clothes. I looked down at my damp sleeves and suddenly realized how cold I still was. Why would he do all this for strangers? The man hesitated carefully. "Mr. Moretti does not usually involve himself personally." That answer somehow unsettled me more. Ethan lifted his head enough to blink around the penthouse with wide eyes. "Can I touch stuff?" "Maybe tomorrow," I whispered tiredly. The man guided us toward the master bedroom before quietly excusing himself. The second the elevator doors closed behind him, silence rushed back into the suite again. Not lonely silence. Peaceful. I had forgotten those felt different. Ethan wandered toward the windows slowly while I stood frozen near the bedroom doorway. The bed alone looked bigger than our old living room. White blankets. Soft lighting. No yelling through walls. No fear sitting in my chest waiting for footsteps outside the door. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket. Ryan. 23 missed calls. 12 text messages. My heartbeat immediately spiked hard enough to make my hands shake again. I almost dropped the phone. Ethan noticed instantly. "Is it him?" I nodded silently. Fear crawled back through my chest so fast it felt physical. Then another message appeared. Unknown number. My pulse stumbled again when I opened it. "Sleep tonight, Claire. Nobody touches you while you are under my protection." No signature. No explanation. Just certainty. I stared at the words while thunder rolled softly beyond the penthouse windows. Somewhere out there in the city, Damien Moretti was still awake. Still watching. And for the first time in almost a year, I realized I was not afraid of falling asleep. I woke up before sunrise because silence still felt unfamiliar. For a few disoriented seconds, I stared at the ceiling without recognizing where I was. No peeling paint. No pipes rattling inside thin apartment walls. No television blaring in another room because Ryan fell asleep drunk on the couch again. Just quiet. Warm blankets. The distant glow of Manhattan beginning to wake outside enormous glass windows. Ethan slept curled beside me beneath white hotel sheets so soft they barely looked real. One small hand rested near his face, relaxed instead of clenched for once. That alone almost shattered me. I slipped carefully out of bed and crossed the penthouse barefoot, still wearing the oversized gray sweatshirt hotel staff had left folded neatly beside the bathroom sink last night. The kitchen lights turned on automatically when I entered. Stainless steel counters. Fresh flowers near the windows. Coffee already waiting inside a silver machine. That probably cost more than my old car. None of this felt meant for people like me. My phone sat untouched beside the marble island where I dropped it hours earlier. 28 missed calls now. More texts. Some angry. Some apologetic. Some pretending concern. I did not open any of them. For the first time in months, I did not feel obligated to explain myself to someone dangerous. That realization felt strange. Powerful even. I poured coffee into a ceramic mug with shaking hands and nearly dropped it when a calm voice spoke behind me. You should eat something with caffeine. I spun around too fast. Damien stood near the private elevator entrance wearing a black wool coat over dark clothes that looked painfully expensive even at 6 in the morning. No security beside him this time. No audience. Just him. Somehow that felt more dangerous. You scared me. You did not hear the elevator. I was not expecting company. His eyes flicked briefly toward the bedroom hallway where Ethan still slept before returning to me. You slept. It sounded almost surprised. I wrapped both hands tighter around the coffee mug. I guess I did. Damien stepped farther into the penthouse slowly, movements calm and controlled like always. Manhattan's pale morning light caught silver near his temples that I had not noticed inside the diner. He looked tired too. Not weak. Just human. Ryan came looking for you again around 3 this morning, he said quietly. Fear tightened instantly in my chest. What happened? Nothing. One word. Flat. Final. But something in his expression told me nothing had not been simple. You do not have to be afraid while you are here, Claire. I stared down into the coffee cup because eye contact with him had become dangerous in a completely different way now. Ryan demanded attention loudly. Damien barely raised his voice at all, yet every room bent around him naturally. Why are you doing this? I whispered. You barely know me. Silence stretched between us for several seconds. Then Damien moved toward the windows overlooking the city. Do you know where I was every Thursday night when I was 6 years old? I blinked in confusion. What? A diner in Brooklyn. His reflection stared back at us from the glass. My mother worked double shifts there after my father died. She used to sit me in the last booth by the kitchen because she could not afford babysitters. Something inside my chest softened painfully. You never mentioned your mother. I do not mention much. His voice lowered slightly. But last night your son looked at me exactly the way I used to look at men who scared everyone else. I swallowed hard. And how was that? Damien turned toward me slowly then. Dark eyes steady. Honest in a way I had not expected. Like maybe they would still choose kindness anyway. My throat tightened so suddenly it hurt. Nobody had ever described Ethan with that kind of care before. Damien noticed my expression immediately. Of course he did. He noticed everything. There is breakfast downstairs whenever you want it, he said quietly, reaching for the elevator again. And Claire? I looked up. Nobody gets your room number without my permission. Then the elevator doors closed behind him, leaving only silence and the lingering scent of expensive cologne in the morning air. And for the first time in years, safety no longer felt temporary. 3 days passed before I saw Damien Moretti again. 3 strange, quiet days where nobody screamed through walls. Nobody checked my phone. Nobody demanded explanations for breathing too loudly or too softly. Ethan slept through the night for the first time in almost a year. The dark circles beneath his eyes slowly faded while he explored the penthouse like it was some magical castle hidden above Manhattan. He liked standing near the windows at sunset counting yellow taxis 30 floors below. I liked hearing him laugh again. The hotel staff treated us with careful kindness that still felt unreal. Fresh food appeared every morning. Laundry returned folded perfectly. Security remained downstairs 24 hours a day without ever making us feel trapped. Protected. Not trapped. I kept reminding myself there was a difference. Damien never called. Never pressured. But somehow his presence stayed everywhere anyway. In the quiet efficiency of the hotel employees. In the respectful silence whenever his name was mentioned. In the knowledge that Ryan had completely disappeared after the night at the diner. No more calls. No more messages. Just silence. Part of me should have felt relieved. Another part stayed nervous because men like Ryan rarely stopped willingly. On the fourth night, Ethan fell asleep early on the couch wrapped in a blanket while rain drifted softly across the city outside. I stood alone near the kitchen making tea when the private elevator opened quietly behind me. Damien stepped into the penthouse wearing a charcoal coat dusted with rainwater across the shoulders. He looked exhausted this time. Truly exhausted. "You have a habit of appearing silently," I murmured softly. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You heard me this time." "Barely." His gaze shifted immediately toward Ethan sleeping peacefully on the couch. Something in Damien's expression softened again the moment he saw him. Not weakness. Never weakness. More like grief remembering what tenderness felt like. "He asked about you yesterday," I admitted quietly. Damien loosened the cuff of one black leather glove slowly. "What did you tell him?" "That you were busy." Smart answer. I studied him carefully in the warm kitchen light. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes now. Tension near his jaw that had not been there before. "You have not slept much either." His eyes met mine briefly. No. Silence settled comfortably around us while thunder rolled somewhere far across the river. It should have felt awkward standing alone at midnight with one of the most feared men in New York inside a penthouse suite he owned. Instead it felt strangely calm. Like the world outside could not quite reach us here. Damien moved toward the windows overlooking Manhattan's glowing skyline. "Ryan left the city this morning," he said quietly. My heartbeat stumbled instantly. "What did you do?" "I gave him a reason to disappear voluntarily." The answer should have frightened me. Maybe it would have once. But Damien said it without pride. Without cruelty. Just certainty. I looked down at the tea warming my hands. "Thank you. Do not thank me for basic decency." I almost smiled. At that. "You really believe protecting people is basic decency?" Damien stayed silent for several seconds before answering. "My mother did." Something about the way he said it made my chest ache unexpectedly. I realized then that Damien talked about his mother the way lonely people talked about the last safe place they ever knew. Ethan stirred sleepily on the couch then opened his eyes halfway. The second he noticed Damien near the windows, he smiled. Small. Sleepy. Trusting. "You came back," he whispered. Damien looked completely still for half a second. Then he crossed the room quietly and pulled the blanket higher around Ethan's shoulders with surprising gentleness. "Yeah, buddy," he said softly. "I came back." Ethan fell asleep again almost instantly afterward. Damien remained standing beside the couch a moment longer, watching him breathe. Watching him like he was protecting something fragile. And suddenly I understood the terrifying truth about Damien Moretti. The city feared him because he could destroy things. But the people who loved him would do it because he stayed.